My name's Hannah. I'm the education lead for Vet Sustain, and I'm really excited to have Emma Cathcart, Liz Barton and Megan Davis here this evening, joining us for a session, Lessons Learned from Penguins. We're going to be talking about wellbeing and human factors and systems thinking, and how all of those three things link together and how we can champion those within practice. So I'm just going to start with a little bit of an introduction to our three wonderful speakers that we've got here today. So I'll start with Megan. After graduating from the Royal Veterinary College in 2012, Megan spent 6 years in full-time small animal practice with the occasional horse thrown in for good measure. Unfortunately, experienced a period of burnout when she was in practice, and so she decided to move across to a role in veterinary education in 2018. And she spent 4 years working for the University of Surrey. She was really involved with running their innovative distributed final year teaching model. And then in 2023, she moved to another role in education, managing undergraduate student placements at Linnaeus. And now she's self-employed. She's just recently become self-employed, doing a mix of locum work, running a home euthanasia service, and freelance and consultancy work in human factors and veterinary education, as well as being a mum. So she is studying for her master's in patient safety and clinical human factors at the University of Edinburgh, and she'll be finishing that in 2026. And through her training in this area, she's developed a particular interest in system thinking and human-centered design. And in her spare time, not that she has very much of that, as we can all resonate with, Megan enjoys spending time with her husband and her daughter, walking their lovely Labrador Basil, cooking and baking, and spending time with her friends. So welcome, Megan. We also have Emma Cathcart. So Emma graduated as a vet from the University of Glasgow in 2009 and worked in small animal practice in central Scotland and Australia for around 7 years. And then after returning to the UK with a young family, she decided to make the transition into academia when she joined the team at the University of Surrey as well. And here she developed a particular interest in helping veterinary students explore factors affecting performance and outcomes in practice. And from here, she did a master's degree in patient safety and human factors with the University of Edinburgh, alongside work and home life. And this led her to her current role at the VDS, where she's their risk analyst. And here Emma works on growing VetSafe and developing insights to help teams optimise opportunities for learning and improvement in all areas of their practice. She's a member of the Veterinary Defence Society's Green Team, who have achieved Green Investors in the Environment accreditation. So well done to you guys. And they are committed to a net zero plan for 2040. As part of this role, Emma strives to combine her passion for systems thinking and human-focused design on positively impacting sustainability outcomes for teams. So welcome, Emma. Thank you also for joining us. And then we have the wonderful Liz Barton as well, who graduated in 2004 and has worked in a variety of clinical settings, from mixed practice in the Lake District to an internship at a referral centre. She started developing wellbeing resources for veterinary teams as a passion project, whilst working part-time after starting a family. WellVet was launched in 2018 to improve access and engagement with mind, body and soul, wellbeing support. And the skills and network built alongside this have created a number of opportunities. And Liz has been brave and fortunate enough to be involved in a variety of projects. And this led to a career diversification, including everything from event management to website creation and forum moderation. So she's written extensively on wellbeing, women's health and parenting in the profession. And this led to career diversification into PR and marketing. And most recently, she joined VetCT as head of communications, where she has truly found her home with a company whose goal is to support veterinary teams by providing round-the-clock clinical support from specialists. So yeah, really interesting panel that we've got this evening, which is really exciting. And just to give you a little bit of background to Vet Sustain, I'm sure many of you know about Vet Sustain already, but we're a community interest company and we're working to champion veterinary sustainability within the profession. And we want to try and enable and inspire people to think about sustainability in everything that they do. So yeah, we're working hard to try and make that happen. I'm going to launch in, first of all, and I'm going to start with Megan Davis. So Megan, what are human factors? Can you give me your interpretation of what human factors are, please?
Thanks, Hannah. I am going to give you, I suppose, a bit more of a official definition, probably the most widely used one. And I'm going to hand over to Emma then to sort of de-jargonise it a little bit because it's a bit wordy. But the definition of human factors that we most commonly use is from the International Ergonomics Association. And human factors are described as a scientific discipline concerned with the understanding of interactions among humans and other elements of a system, and a profession that applies theory, principles, data, and methods to design in order to optimize human well-being and overall system performance. It's not very catchy.
Not the catchiest. So Emma Cathcart, over to you to make that make sense to us all, please.
So I think important to start with is it's what is human factors. It's a whole field of study. So it's this whole area of looking at how people work with everything else in the work system. It's not just about I suppose qualities of being human. So that's part of it. So qualities of being human, factors of being human is part of it, but it's how those humans fit into the wider workspace. And it's the study that looks at how people interact with all those different things around us. So we'll talk a bit more about systems, but I'm sure we're going to mention the word systems a lot. If I'm in the room, we will. But the system is kind of everything that makes up a workspace, or a functioning unit of stuff, and that's the people, that's the buildings, that's the equipment, that's the culture, that's everything that fits into that system, if you like, the system that's creating outcomes at the end of it. But it's looking at how people fit into that. People are at the center of it, and people interact with all those different things in a particular way. So you've probably heard of the phrase ergonomics. Ergonomics is kind of synonymous with human factors in many different contexts, but it's looking at how people, ergonomics is how people fit with things like desks, whether the chairs fit the qualities of being human, fitting work to people rather than trying to make people fit to the system. So it's kind of looking at how we can design our systems, not just the physical products or equipment in those spaces, but everything that we interact with, to help maximize our outcomes as being human, so well-being outcomes, but any other system performance outcome that you might want to measure as well. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It absolutely does. Thank you, Emma. And Liz, what does it mean to you then? What do human factors mean to you?
Yeah, I'll call myself out as the non-academic in the room. I'm very much coming at this from a learner perspective rather than an educator. And human factors is something that I've sort of come to as a result of actually working with the vet-led team who helped to found and get going with the WellVet events. So I sort of learned about the intersection between well-being and human factors through running those events with them. And I guess from being in clinical practice of all shapes and sizes for over 17 years, I think we think about workflows in practice. We talk about workflows and sort of practice efficiencies. And this is almost a way of, a workflow, a good, efficient, well-functioning workflow it's thinking about the human journey, the patient journey, the client journey, all of those things together and optimizing that. And we think about that for efficiency, cracking through the work, but actually has a massive impact on so many other things: patient outcomes, well-being of the team members, service provision to clients. And then you build on top of that the additional things like culture and like getting enough to eat and drink and looking after yourselves. So it's this really I know Emma doesn't like this word, but holistic, but it just encapsulates so much of what it means to be human in a working environment where delivering clinical care relies on so many factors, and thinking about how those can be optimized.
Yeah, it's really interesting when you talk about that, because we're obviously working in this high pressure environment a lot of the time within veterinary medicine, and I don't know how many of us stop and think about the system that we're working within and how we could optimize that to support our role. So I'd really like to know, Liz, I'm going to start with you, where your interest in human factors came from. Like, where did you first find out about that interest?
Yeah, so I think with the wellbeing side, we were looking at the wellbeing across the areas of sort of mind, body, and soul. And, you know, the human factors play into that. I mean, originally, you know, I understand it kind of came across from aviation and providing that sort of psychological safety to speak up and actually call out things that weren't working well, and being able to have that trust within the environment to actually, you know, for all of the team members to be able to identify things that weren't working and sort of signal dangers, and then building out from that about, okay, so how then do you make the systems, you know, improve so that people feel safer. And so for me, it was very much coming at it from that understanding that this is so tightly linked to how we feel, you know, both psychologically and physically in doing our jobs. And, you know, well-being, I don't want to say that term too many times, because I think people can kind of almost think of it as a bit of a fluffy term, but it's about living happily and healthily, and actually, you know, enjoying our journey, you know, through our working lives, and that's what it's all about, right? So this is absolutely central to living well within the workplace and beyond.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Liz. So Megan, where did your interest in this come from then?
Unmute myself. I think I probably discovered human factors as a kind of field and as a thing, I suppose, when I started to teach it to students at Surrey, and working alongside Emma, who was kind of a few steps ahead of me on that kind of on that journey, and I was kind of learning as we were teaching it to the students, and for me it was that kind of light bulb moment of suddenly the kind of challenges and struggles that I had faced when I was in practice suddenly made so much more sense. And with that human factors lens, I could just, yeah, really suddenly see all of those challenges that I faced in a completely different light. And so that then kind of just started me kind of digging, I suppose. You know, the more I knew, the more I wanted to know, because I knew that it was helping me to make sense of it. And I hoped that in helping others to make sense of it, I could perhaps help them to not face as many challenges as I had faced in practice.
Brilliant. Thank you, Megan. And then Emma, just coming on to you, where's your interest come from?
There's a lot of similarities in my journey with Megan's. For me, the hardest part, the thing I struggled most with when I was in practice was dealing with poor outcomes, and that feeling that that's all on my shoulders, you know, that my patient outcomes, or if if a case didn't go quite as I planned or quite as we all intended, that was somehow a personal failing, that was because I wasn't good enough, or I wasn't good enough really as a vet, and I think I carried that for quite a long time. And there was a couple of cases where I was quite affected by poor outcomes, and I didn't really have the opportunity to process them in any sort of constructive way. Nobody was horrible to me in any way. I think that's, you know, I had a lovely team who were kind, but we didn't have the chance to kind of talk about why that outcome might have happened or what else we could learn from it. And so similarly, I ended up in a teaching role partly through logistics of having a very small child after we came back from Australia, and not being able to go back into practice at that time, but, you know, being really deeply affected myself by it, and really wanting to make a difference to how new graduates and recent graduates especially didn't shoulder all that responsibility for outcomes. You're accountable, you're part of the system, you know, you do have to show up and do your job, but it's trying to be a bit more balanced and objective. And I think once I realized that there was this whole world of study that looked at factors affecting performance, you know, whether that's in sports or aviation or in veterinary practice or in medicine, there were so many different ways of looking at those factors that affect a human's performance. You start to go, okay, this is a little bit like therapy, actually. You know, it's a little bit like like Megan said, it's sort of, once you see it, you can't unsee it, but it's a little bit like making sense of the world around you with a different perspective entirely. So yeah, for me, it was a little bit like therapy. And that's, again, similarly, once you know a little bit, you start to go, oh, that's fascinating. I wonder what else there is there. And so you pull at the thread. And yeah, I think that's where my kind of bug came from. And then you realize how applicable it is to so many walks of life. You know, it's not just factors affecting your clinical performance. It's you can actually apply this stuff to non-work related issues, everything. You know, it can relate it to absolutely everything. And then again, I know we've spoken about this before, Hannah, but you know, those overlapping outcomes of, if you're aiming to improve quality in one way, how are you measuring your outcomes? But sustainability and well-being, you know, they're sort of hand in hand. You know, human performance, sustainability and well-being, they're all so tightly linked that I don't think you can kind of separate them. So yeah, that's kind of where the passion and the spark came from for me.
Oh, it's brilliant. It's really lovely to hear you say that you can apply this in lots of different walks of your life, because it absolutely, I think once you start to think in this way, it allows you to apply it to everything, which is so helpful, isn't it? So we have talked about this a little bit already, but just to help people understand how this really relates to our profession, Megan, can you give us an overview of how you feel human factors really do relate to veterinary professions and wellbeing in particular?
I think for me, it's the fact that, you know, we say this a lot, but as a collective, as a profession, 99.9% of us go to work to do a good job. We want to do a good job, and we want to come home feeling that you get when you've done a good job. And so looking at things from a human factors lens, as Emma's already touched on, I think you can't always have good outcomes. And so I think looking at things from a human factors lens helps to process when things don't go right. But also, human factors, a kind of easier definition that I've heard used is making it easy to do the right thing. And so I think if we can make it easy for people in whatever they're doing within the system, within the profession, to do the right thing, then that is gonna give them more of that feeling of going home feeling like they've done the best they can and they've done a good job. And that's certainly something that had a huge impact on my well-being. And I would imagine most of us being that kind of person that wants to do a good job, it would have an impact on others' well-being as well.
Thank you, Megan. Emma, have you got any thoughts on that around also relating it to reflective practice? Because we talk a lot about reflective practice now, don't we, in the profession, and how we need to reflect on things, and how can you explain a little bit around how this relates to reflective practice as well within the profession?
Yeah, for sure. I think reflective practice is probably one of those buzzwords as well that's got a bit of a bad name from having to write reflective essays and reflect on our CPD in a fairly non-structured way. But yeah, I think human factors helps us to be a bit more objective in that. Like I said before, it's very easy to just look inwards and do all the reflection on your own part to play that you had in whatever outcome or whatever process was occurring. But the sort of structure that you can use, there's different tools and different structures that you can use from within the human factors systems analysis frameworks can help you to sort of force you to look beyond the individual and force you to pay a bit more attention to what else was going on, what else could have contributed, and know what things you can and can't have any sort of influence or control over changing, because there's lots of stuff in our practice life that you can't have any control over. And again, sort of recognizing that and being a bit kinder to yourself and going, right, it's not all on me, but I can't also change absolutely everything that is going on in my workspace. So it's just having that awareness first thing of all the stuff that does influence your outcomes, does influence how you experience work, you know, whether that's through outcomes or just through joy in work, you know. but it's that balance and that objectivity that you can bring to that reflective process. So when you're going, what happened? So what does that mean to me? And now what am I going to do next? Doing that in a way that feels a little bit more balanced, I think is really helpful. And then if you can influence things, if you can make changes, like Megan said, being able to actually design things to make it easier for people to do the things the way they want to do. You know, and designing doesn't just mean changing packaging of things, but you know, we can go on to that if you want to. I'm very happy to talk about design of work systems for wellbeing as well. But I think, yeah, that's the objectivity and the slight structure it brings is helpful.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's it's important, isn't it? Because we do reflect a lot, but I think often that leads us to a, you know, well, what do we do next? And if you can separate it into the controllables versus the uncontrollables, that's a really helpful starting point to be like, right, well, those are the things that I actually can't do anything about. So let's focus on the things that I can make some changes within. So Liz, from your perspective, you know, have you got any thoughts here on how human factors really relate within our profession itself, and particularly around wellbeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're really well set up as a profession to do this well. If you think about our role is being sort of critical thinking and problem solving, you know, for example, if there was a group of cattle whose health and welfare was being impacted in a consistent way on a farm, you know, maybe they kept getting lame, we would look at, you know, why that kept repeatedly happening if it wasn't just an isolated case. You know, maybe their stalls were too short, you know, maybe there was some inappropriate flooring, you know, maybe that was then affecting their diet and nutrition and their milk output and their stress levels and their fertility, as well as increasing the need for medication and costs. You know, we'd sort of pick apart you know, what was happening at what levels. I remember, you know, going to investigate things on farms, and the boss sort of telling me, well, why didn't you walk the field and check for toxic plants and, you know, the location of gates and things. And I think the nice thing about human factors is it gives a really nice structure for us to be able to pick apart, you know, why are our team members burning out, you know, why are common errors happening in practice, and then, you know, what can we do to change the various points around that system to, you know, impact not just the well-being, but also you know, the outcomes for patients. And I think, as we've already all alluded to, because we want to go do a good job, if we're not facilitated to do a good job, that does impact our well-being. You know, I've beat myself up terribly when things didn't go well in practice, and you know, especially when that isn't our fault because we're sort of not set up for success, that's really challenging. So it has a huge impact on well-being.
So I do want to come back to your ideas around how people can start to implement human factors into their practice and into their daily working life. But before we do that, can we do a bit of demystification around what systems thinking is? Because we've got all these different terms that we throw out all the time, and I don't know if everybody else gets confused by them, but I certainly do. And it's like, oh, there's all these different terms. So what's systems thinking and how does that relate? So Emma, I'm going to come to you first. Can you start the process, please, of demystifying systems thinking, please?
Yeah, sorry, I talk about systems a lot, and it's just ingrained in my brain. So systems essentially is just a bunch of stuff arranged in a particular way that interact with each other to achieve a goal, whatever that goal is. So in everyday life, there are systems everywhere. So a car is a system. It's a bunch of components that are all arranged together, and they work and they interact to transport people. And making a cup of tea is a system. That's one I quite like to start with, because it feels on the surface like it's quite a simple system, but there's quite a lot of stuff that you have to put together in a very particular way to achieve the outcome of a good cup of tea. And there's a lot of things that can affect whether you get a good cup of tea at the end of that. And there's a lot of things that influence whether, you know, the cup of tea that I might like is the same as the cup of tea everybody else in the room might like, and it might not be. Here's the Yorkshire girl talking about tea. But anyway, that's a system, you know, an example of a bunch of things that are arranged together in a particular way that interact to achieve an outcome. So there are small systems, there are big systems, and there are systems in systems. So that's probably enough of that word. But our practice, you know, veterinary practice itself, and you can define your boundaries to what is in your system. So depending on what you're wanting to say is the outcome or the function of your system, then you define your boundaries. So you might say the whole veterinary profession is a massive macro system, or you might narrow it down and say my veterinary practice is a system within that bigger system. So still saying it, sorry. But that's essentially what it is. And it's systems thinking is about looking at and connecting the dots between all the different things that make up our system and looking at how things interact and what happens if certain things don't interact the way we want, and how we could adapt those interactions to achieve the right outcomes. But rather than, you know, we're quite analytical. I think as vets, we try and break things down and try and find the kind of the root of a problem and break things into smaller pieces. But like Liz said, sometimes we're forced to kind of look at the big picture again and go, oh, let's look at the whole animal again. And it's kind of like doing that zooming out thing and going, right, we've got this thing that's going on in our practice, and you know, we're making this medication error and it seems to be keeping on happening. And rather than going too down into the depths of it, it's about zooming back out again and go, okay, so how does this fit with everything else that we know about our practice, and where are the overall strengths, where are the underpinning kind of, you might hear me say, pebbles in your shoe, those things that get in the way for people, the kind of common system factors that get in the way. But it's about looking at that bigger picture and going, are the various things that could be underpinned by the same weaknesses or the same strengths perhaps. So that's a kind of simple way of thinking about it. But rather than zooming in and getting more analytical, it's kind of the opposite and being a little bit more big picture, joining the dots thinking.
So building on from that then, Megan, I'm just going to ask you this. Do we have to be careful not to hone ourselves too much into a really sharp focus? And how do we make sure when we're trying to think in a systems way, how do we make sure that we think about the veterinary profession as well as our veterinary practice, as well as the individual tasks that we're doing, if we're thinking about how the different systems might work?
Yeah, I think it is really important, as Emma said, to not kind of assume that there's kind of one thing going on that means that something happened. One of everyone has like bugbear terms that they don't like, right? Human error is that for me. So a good example of something that might involve looking through a systems lens is an overdose in practice, and I'm almost sure that everybody here will have witnessed it or done it themselves. They will have suddenly realised that that dog had 10 times more Metacam in its injection than it should have done. And I suppose the easy thing to do is to say, oh, well, that was just human error. Someone made a mistake, and it's as simple as that, right? But if you look at it from a systems thinking lens, then you don't just assume that it was just a mistake that just happened and that there isn't really therefore anything that you can do about it. You think about the why and all of the reasons around why that might have happened. So just like, I'm not going to go into it in a huge amount of detail, but you could think about whether the bottle was labelled correctly, or whether there was a label on the syringe if it had been pre-drawn up. You could think about where the drugs formulary was, and was it somewhere that was easily accessible for somebody to go and check the dose? Was there a checking system in place where the drug that was drawn up was checked by somebody else before it was administered? Was the person that did the administering at the end of a really awful shift where they'd been completely run off their feet, they hadn't had any lunch, and they were exhausted? So you can see, even in just like 2 minutes, I can come up with 5 other different reasons as to what might have come into that one incident that might have just been put down to an error or to a human error or a mistake. And by being able to pick up on those, we can then start to say, okay, well, we can change some of those things quite easily. and that may result in that similar error not happening again.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point that you make, isn't it? Because it also helps us to take away some of the blame and guilt that it was our fault.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it allows us to say, okay, actually, there was a whole heap of different factors that fed into this happening. And whilst I take responsibility for it happening because I'm the one that pressed the syringe plunge, I can acknowledge that there were all these other factors which influenced that situation, and therefore makes me feel slightly better about it. So Liz, coming to you then, can you sort of build on that from a wellbeing perspective then? How does this feed into wellbeing?
Yeah, I think just thinking of ourselves as systems, right? I mean, you know, we've got a mind, body and soul that's all interconnected. And you know, in my sort of demographic of the Vet Mums Facebook group, quite often people just come in there going, I'm just completely overwhelmed and I'm dropping balls and I don't know what to do. And almost doing that audit of our own systems. Are we getting enough sleep? Are we getting enough support? You know, are we able to you know, perhaps pare back on things that are unnecessary mental load, or make our own systems easier so we can build in you know, more efficiencies? And are we getting enough to eat and drink and things? So I think this applies not just in clinical practice, but in our own lives as well. And if we don't take the time to sort of take a step back and do a kind of personal systems audit, I think particularly the age and stage I'm at, I mean, anyone else that sort of follows me on LinkedIn will see I'm sort of banging on about menopause at the moment, because again, that's something that affects so many elements of how we function as a human system, and just having a better understanding of that and taking the time to so very often we don't leave enough time for ourselves for that sort of self-care piece. And I think part of self-care is that analysis of what do we need to change to make our own system work better.
Yeah, so it's a really nice point to make. When I was in practice, I used to have an emergency chocolate bar in my glove box, because my weekends on call used to be carnage, you know, from 5 o'clock on Friday through to 9 o'clock on Monday morning. It was just chaos, and so I used to have emergency food. But I think maybe we need to have ways in practice of everybody thinking about what they need for their personal system to function really well, and then try and be open about that with our colleagues, so that you know, we know that, like, if I mean, I've worked with Megan and Emma for a long time, and I know that Megan needs regular hugs, you know, that keeps her system functioning really well. So but not, you don't always get to know that about your colleagues, and so maybe we need to be a little bit more open and also think about what it is that we need to be able to function really well at work, and then share that with people. So yeah, just some ideas.
If anybody's interested in finding out more about that, the VetLed have just been doing a week's campaign on HALT, the HALT campaign. So hungry, angry, tired, late are the kind of main ones. There's other words that feed into that acronym, but all those things impact on how we as people can perform, and our own sense of well-being as well. You know, as you say, Liz, we have to kind of start in our own system, but that's a widely recognised kind of, you wouldn't go to work drunk, but we quite often go to work very, very tired. You know, and actually, where's the boundary between what we think is acceptable in terms of not prioritising our own self in that system? So yeah, the HALT campaign is really worth having a look at.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Emma. And so Emma, just sticking on this theme, how do you feel that systems thinking really relate to human factors in veterinary medicine?
For me, systems thinking is human factors. It's part of how we, I don't think it's not a separate thing. It's part of how we practice when we're practicing human factors. And it's that whole recognizing that nothing happens in isolation. Everything is, even if you're working in ambulatory practice and you're the only person there, there's a lot of stuff that is connected to how you work and how you experience work. And yeah, I think it's that joining the dots between all the different things that could affect whether today goes well or not. And part of it is sort of looking ahead and trying to sort of preempt some of that. And, you know, when we start to be more aware of risk factors or the things that do affect us, then perhaps making sure that we have those pause points and we go, hang on, we need to have a briefing today because things are looking a bit rubbish. We've got a full diary and somebody's off sick. So what can we do to look after each other? You know, it's sort of being a bit more proactive rather than just reactive when things haven't gone to plan. Because I think once you start to see all the different things and you see how that all plays out, it's a lot easier to kind of almost see the trajectory of where things could go, and be a bit more, yeah, have those pause points and sort of check in with each other before some things happen. So we're kind of stopping anything from affecting us negatively if we can. It's not always possible, but yeah.
So let's think about how all this relates to sustainability then. So Liz, from your perspective, what do you feel is your sort of definition of sustainability, and how does this relate to human factors and systems thinking?
So I've actually just recently completed a sustainability communications diploma, so I could give you lots of definitions about what sustainability is and isn't, and how the term is used and abused. But I think fundamentally it's really about sort of living today in a way that ensures the continuation and health of the future generation, or in the case of our own well-being, our own sort of future self, or the, you know, the teams that we're working with. So it's sort of acting in a way where we're considering the outcomes and the impact on tomorrow in what we're doing.
Thank you, Liz. Emma, what are your thoughts around that then?
Yeah, I think it's hard to say it any better than that, to be honest. It's, you know, it is about making sure that we recognise that our actions and our choices and behaviours now are all connected. Everything is connected to what will come in the future, and we do have some influence over that. And it is about making sure that we can be happy, healthy, and live live a full life now, but that people in the future can still do the same, and our whole planet can do the same. You know, and in a kind of veterinary profession perspective, I think of it's not just about the kind of environmental sustainability of making sure that our world stays healthy, but about making sure the workforce is the retention issue we know is a huge challenge for the profession. But if we can prioritize looking after people within that makes our workforce more sustainable. It makes our businesses more sustainable. It's all those things together. You know, it's not quality improvement isn't one particular outcome. It's all those different outcomes linked together, and they're all to do with sustainability of the profession going forward.
Thank you, Emma. And Megan, what does sustainability mean to you then?
I'll find the mute button. For sake. You think I'd be used to this by now, wouldn't you? I think for me, it's about, you know, we know as a profession that we are struggling at the moment with recruitment, with retention. And so for me, when I kind of talk about sustainability of the veterinary profession, it's kind of about sustaining the people that work within the veterinary profession, sustaining the teams, and sustaining the profession more widely, to make it somewhere that people feel able to continue to kind of stay in and engage with in whatever form that looks like for them. And that's, you know, that's not necessarily saying like everyone must stay in clinical practice, but just, I guess, trying to lessen that seemingly quite common feeling of disillusionment and dissatisfaction with working within the profession. And as I said earlier, for me, human factors really helped me to understand much better my challenges within the profession and the reasons why I ultimately left clinical practice. And so I think having that different perspective will really be helpful in sustaining individuals and teams working within the profession.
And can you dig into that a little bit more around how these sort of 3 areas can really help you to champion wellbeing within your practice environment?
I think Emma touched on this earlier, but I think it's really useful for us to be able to let go a little bit almost of that blame. And you know, we talk a lot about moving away from a blame culture and towards a just culture. So it's not a no blame culture. It's not somewhere where we don't take any individual accountability or responsibility for what we're doing. It's just a culture where we're able to say, yes, I was involved in this, but I wasn't the only thing that was involved. And I think that self-criticism and blame is something that impacts a lot of people working within our profession. And if we're able to put a different lens on that and let go of some of that blame, and let go of some of that self-criticism and be a little bit more self-compassionate, then I think that will massively improve well-being.
Thank you, Megan. Yeah, I think that's you make a really important point. And Liz, I'm going to come to you, and I'm excited about this answer because I know it's going to link to our title, which is Lessons Learned from Penguins. So Liz, would you like to share, please?
Yeah, and Megan's provided the perfect segue, because actually self-compassion is also has been shown to sort of mediate the impact of resilience on well-being. And we talked in our sort of warm-up call how, you know, we're not necessarily fully comfortable and happy with the term resilience because it can sort of mean different things to different people. It still has connotations of that Teflon, you know, tough enough to tough it out and water off a duck's back and all that. But actually a lot of resilience and therefore, you know, sustainability, if you like, within the profession is actually a function of our social systems, you know, our teams, the support networks that we have around us. And sort of thinking about the penguins, the emperor penguins, they tough it out in the harshest environment on Earth, you know, in the Antarctic winters. But if one was on its own, it would, you know, freeze to death pretty quick. The way they do it is by huddling together. And the lovely thing is, you know, the ones that are on the outside bearing the brunt of the Antarctic storms, they actually then, you know, once they sort of had enough, they rotate inwards, and then so others kind of tough it out on the edges. And there will always be times in different individuals' lives where you know, we're sort of have more of our own personal resource to be able to support others, and there are times that we actually need that support. And I think thinking about it, you know, as we sort of said, we're not great at self-compassion. We're sometimes not great at sort of self-care and prioritizing ourselves. And I think one of the things that we can be worst at is actually asking for support and relying on other people. And again, you know, particularly when you're sort of juggling kids and things as well, and all of their needs, actually, you know, understanding that it does take a village to raise a child, and getting support from people around you when you need it. And also, you know, within the veterinary practice, it takes a team to treat patients well. So just being more aware that by creating good, strong practice teams, by making sure we have good support networks within and beyond the practice. And I appreciate, you know, some practice cultures aren't ideal, and you know, whether people are able to sort of stay there and influence the culture, or whether it's a case of, you know, finding a culture that better fits them is obviously a complex problem. But certainly making sure that we have support systems, you know, beyond the practice and ideally within the practice as well, and really do sort of understand the importance of that social element of resilience or sustainability in the profession, like the penguins.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you. Yeah, no, that's great. And so I just, in the lot, we've not got all that much. We said when we planned this, we said it would just be a really nice chat, and we would just chat about all this, all these interesting systems thinking approach, and it would just take us through the time. So, and that's exactly what's happened. So we've only got 10 minutes left. So I just want to come on to how can we start to implement this within practice. So we've talked a lot about defining human factors, systems thinking, sustainability, well-being, how those four things relate together, and how systems thinking and human factors are really much of the same thing. How can we actually, if we're wanting to try and champion these things within our workplace or within our life, how can we start to do that? So Megan, I'm going to come to you first, please, with some ideas.
I think start small and just start by just watching and noticing and being curious about what's going on around you. Human factors and systems thinking and everything that's involved in that is one of those things that once you see it, you can't unsee it. I was actually texting a friend earlier who is locuming in a new practice today, and she was texting me saying, oh God, there's so many things that I can see that I just want to fix, but I can't because I'm just here for a week and I just can't. And I was like, yeah, you can't unsee it. It's a bit like when you suddenly notice like your friend or your partner chews really loudly, and once you've spotted it, you can't not see it anymore. You see it every single time. And for me, that's what this is about. And so for people in practice, just starting to kind of look at those seemingly really quite tiny things, small details, but things that are just grating and just, you know, like Emma said earlier, the pebbles in your shoes, like what is it that's just happening that just is making everyone's life just that little bit more difficult? And having a look at that and digging right into it and really kind of deciding, you know, is this something we need to change? Is this something we can change? And if so, you know, how could we kind of potentially improve it?
Thank you, Megan. Liz, what are your thoughts on where we can start in this process if we want to implement it in practice?
Yeah, I mean, I think this whole area is utterly fascinating, but I'll be completely honest. As soon as people start talking about, you know, systems thinking and human factors, I switch off because it all sounds a bit academic, you know, like out of my comfort zone. So I think using the really practical examples like Emma's cup of tea, you know, and giving those analogies and relating it back to, you know, how we you know, analyze the systems of care that we provide for our patients, and then saying, you know, we need to do the same for our team members. So sort of explaining the why behind it, giving those practical examples, and really storytelling to encourage people to really understand and get on the journey of human factors. And I think one of the things that we haven't talked about too much, but was alluded to earlier, is how it is data driven, and actually being able to say, okay, so how can we measure this, and celebrating the successes, I think is really important as well. And I'm sure there's plenty of sort of examples in the literature that you know, could be used to sort of tell the story about how this can really improve patient outcomes, which is a really strong motivator for all of us. And then, you know, also as a consequence, both of the patient outcomes, but also of the other improvements, you know, our own well-being and hopefully longevity in practice as well.
Thank you, Liz. Emma, what are your thoughts here for starting points then?
I think with that understanding that we are part of a whole practice network with lots of different things in it, I think just changing the language that we're using when we're trying to explore why things happen the way that they happen. You know, we're not investigating problems. We're not trying to sort of get to the bottom of things. It's about, like Megan said earlier, the curious, explorative approach to really kind of try and understand what's going on for people in different roles across the practice, and using language that doesn't imply judgment. I think when you're curious, it's very hard to be judgmental at the same time. When you're truly curious, when you're really curious to understand rather than sort of asking questions to kind of get to the bottom of something so that you can apportion some sort of responsibility and blame. But if you're really genuinely curious, trying to understand different people's perspectives will build empathy in the team as well. So, you know, if you're trying to learn why something happened, understanding what pressures different people in your team are under and what priorities they're juggling. And you might not see a lot of the time what's going on for other people. You can assume it, but you can't really truly understand it until we start to explore it. So using language that helps people to be open and share what's going on for them. What else was going on for you at the time? What else were you trying to juggle at that time? And trying to sort of put it back into that context of, we know everybody's here to do a good job, and we trust that everybody in our workplace is here for that purpose. So let's start from that starting point and understanding we're all working together to achieve good care, and use language that supports that, rather than you should have followed a protocol, or the word should, I think, should be banned. Should be banned. Do you know what I mean? I think it's one of those things that as soon as we're feeling judged or fear of judgment or blame, it's that affects how you experience work an awful lot. And we know people are already affected by especially patient harm outcomes. So if we can be kinder to ourselves and kinder to each other in how we talk about those things, I think that's a good starting point from that foundation.
Yeah, I really love what all of you have said there. So Megan, starting with the watching and the noticing and thinking about little things that you can do. Liz coming in with de-jargonizing, telling the why, and doing some storytelling of practical examples, and then Emma bringing in that curiosity.
If you've got one or two people who are really keen on this stuff in a practice, but it feels like they've got a mountain to climb with kind of getting everybody else on board, I think coming to accept the fact that you will not get everybody on board, but that's okay, and that you can still make a really big impact with even just a couple of people, because it's a snowball effect, and with a couple of people then you will get 2 or 3 more, and it doesn't take much. It doesn't take a very big number of people to kind of tip the balance in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Megan. So I'm just going to really quickly ask you guys to give some key take-home messages from this session.
Watch with curiosity. Think about as many factors as you can possibly kind of see or possibly think of that might be impacting on a situation. If you're interested to know more, there are now, thankfully, lots of amazing resources that you can go away and look at.
Thank you, Megan. Liz, quick take-home messages from you.
Yeah, I think everyone can start with this today by starting small. And I really like there's a model, sort of Stephen Covey's circle of concern, influence and control. And we might be concerned about some of the systems across the veterinary profession, but not able to do much about them. We might be able to influence ones within our teams to varying degrees, but what we can control is our own human factors and thinking about the systems that we have around us, and that includes support systems. So if you're sort of watching this and thinking, gosh, I'm not sure how I'm going to get my practice on board with this, that and the other, start with living this in your own life, doing your own sort of systems audits and showing yourself that self-compassion and building maybe your support networks where you need to, and sort of finding out what areas of the halts do you need to pay attention to, and then go in armed with your own data. I made these changes, and can we expand this out to the practice, because now I'm sleeping better, I'm feeling healthier, I'm more productive, and wouldn't it be great if we could offer this to everyone else? So start with what you can control and then expand that out to what you can influence, and don't get too caught up with what just concerns you that maybe is a bit harder to impact.
Thank you, Liz. And Emma, coming on to you then, take home messages.
Be kind to yourself. We've talked about self-compassion. Be kind to yourself and others, and use language that supports that. And we have talked about a lot of stuff that might feel quite conceptual, but there are real tangible tools that you can use to help make this practically relevant. So there are various different contributory factors frameworks that you can use to help you look at how a system is functioning, and look at the strengths and weaknesses in what you're already doing. So perhaps start with stuff that feels accessible. I've just popped in the chat a link to VetSafe because that's what I'm involved with developing, but we have built it so that it is founded on this foundation of sort of human factors basis, but with people at the very centre. But I think, yeah, language is hugely important across all of this, and if we can base our language on that understanding that there are lots of things that affect everybody, then I think that is only going to help everybody involved.
Thank you to the three of you for giving up your evening and coming along to this session to share your experiences of human factors, systems thinking, and how they link to sustainability and well-being. And thank you to everybody for also giving up your evening to join us in this session. We will send round the recording. It will go onto our YouTube channel. You can find out more about VetSustain at www.vetsustain.org. And if you would like to donate to us, we are a community interest company, and we are based on the very kind generosity of our volunteers giving up their time and energy. So if you do want to donate, that would be amazing. And yeah, thank you so much to the three of you for coming along and sharing your fabulous experiences and knowledge with us. We really appreciate it. So yeah, brilliant.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a really good discussion.